Welcome to the Evolution of Aloha podcast with me, Dr. Jerry Ibalarosa Tanel. Now let's talk story. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on the Evolution of Aloha podcast, a Plowline production. And I am your host, Dr. Jerry Ibalarosa Tanel. And I am so honored to have the privilege of speaking with Marwa Almusawi. She's of Arab American heritage, and she spent her formative years in Iran, Iraq, Jordan, and Syria. She is honored to serve as the director for the Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion at Green River College, and she holds a master's degree in education with a focus on examining the politicization of Muslim women's representations. Mara also has a bachelor's degree in international relations, and in her leisure time, she enjoys discovering great local chefs, baking, and hosting family and community gatherings. Welcome so much to the podcast, Marwa. And I love that you talk about, just family and belonging. That must be really important to you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Jerry, for having me and for this invitation. What a delight and really a true honor for me to be here with you today.
Yes, I'm so happy that you had the opportunity. I know that you're really busy right now, especially taking into the political climate of diversity, equity, inclusion, and being the leader of it. But I wanted to kind of talk to you about just this sense. Let's just start with this sense of belonging.
Mm.
I know for myself, as you can see, my whole entire office is set up as if I'm in Hawaii. I have this make-believe environment that makes me feel like home. And I put things up around me just to remind me of what it is to be home, even when I'm not home. And so I know that you and I spoke, and recently you went back home, right?
I did.
Yeah. So talk to me about it. Tell me about it.
Yes, so I journeyed back home to Iraq December of this past year, and that was my first time returning back home since, a decade since I last visited. And, the question of home and belonging, it's a really complex question and a very sophisticated one. And I know that to be true for many of us. But for me personally, as someone who my family immigrated here when I was 11 years old. And so I'm part of what some scholars would characterize as the one and a half generation, right? So I have spent my formative years elsewhere. And then I have also, come to this country at a young age. And so I think for me, the question of home and belonging is one that I'm quite honestly really in search of. And it's a fluid one, right? And so where is home? What does it mean to belong? And so I think this most recent, trip from me to Iraq, it complicated that question even further for me, right?
Mm.
Because here I am, and what I should also mention, and I think it's really significant about my experience, is that I was journeying back home at the age of 36, exactly the age that my parents came to the United States. And so there was so much, going through my, my mind and my heart, and really spiritually preparing myself for that trip. So what does it mean for me to now return, home at 36 years old? I'm a mother now to two daughters, to a land that I love deeply. And I think about that love because that love to me, many times I think I love Iraq, or I have this like imaginary version of Iraq, or this attachment. Some is rooted in reality, and some, I wonder if it's rooted in how I've constructed the notion of home, right? And so yeah, it was a beautiful, beautiful journey, um a sophisticated one, difficult one at moments, but nonetheless so fulfilling, right? As I was there, I am very familiar, intimately familiar with the culture, with the language, with the religion, but there were certainly moments that made me realize I also have these other experiences, right? There are reference points and subtleties that might be discussed about either events or uh, happenings that I realize I didn't share that experience, with everyone
Mhm.
there. And so, as I've shared with you, I'm still trying to unpack and still trying to make sense of what is that trip and what does it mean for me. Yeah, so I'll pause here and then
It's
we
it's
can
it's
definitely.
so it's exciting. It's exciting and it's complex and it's convoluted because we live in this diaspora, right? We're away from our home. And I totally understand when you're talking about these experiences. Did we construct these experiences based off of memory, or is it created based off of the knowledge that we've accumulated while living away from our birth home?
Yes. Yes.
So I totally understand that. And a lot of people who don't understand what the diaspora is, it's individuals who are living away from their homelands and working towards trying to figure out how do we find this sense of belonging in a place where sometimes we may not always feel like we belong.
Hmm.
Do you feel that?
Right. Right. So, I mean, in Iraq, am I, fully Iraqi? Am I Iraqi American? Is my identity hyphenated? Here, in a lot of spaces, I don't feel like I belong. I don't, feel that sense of attachment or belonging, right? So it's really that third space in between, or the space in between, of searching for that home. But I think one of the realizations that I had as a result of that trip is that home can be many places, right?
Mhm.
I think about my life here, and even though I said I don't, feel a sense of belonging, I think it's contextual, and it depends on where I'm at, because I've also built a home here and a life here and a community that loves me and I love them, and they're a part of me now too, right? A very diverse community. And so I think about how that has also transformed me. And so I think it's given me an appreciation, right, to that our identities, right, are multi-layered. And so, and I don't have to pick and choose to, to be one thing, but I can honor and embody all of these different parts of my identity. And I, as I also hear you talking about, like, where do we construct that sense of home? I actually think about my parents, and I think about how their love and their admiration for Iraq, how they've transferred that to myself and to my four sisters. Both of my parents were involved in a resistance movement against Saddam's regime. And so there are all these parts of my story in which I think the work that I do here now in the United States, it's not a coincidence. It's really in alignment with my family's values and beliefs of, standing up for justice and against oppression and liberation for all. And so, I just remember the stories of my dad, telling us about his homeland, and town in Misan, and really. Yeah, just at a very young age, instilling that love of Iraq, the values of community, of togetherness, of uh, yeah, of that deep, knowing your neighbor and really connecting with them at such a core level that they become part of your family. Those are some of the things that I remember and hold dear to my heart.
You know, Mara, it's really interesting. Excuse me, I'm coming down with a cold. It's really interesting that you talk about this love for Aina, love for the land, love for Kanaka, Aloha Kanaka, love for the people, everyone, right? And you have this alignment that you speak of. And it seems like that is what everyone wants. Everyone wants to have that. It's like I'm always it's like I always talk about the triadic alignment.
Mm.
Aloha Akua, Aloha Aina, and Aloha Kanaka. So aloha akua is a love and connection to the divine, whatever name you give the divine, right? Aloha aina, love and connection to the land. That land, this is the land which feeds us, which shelters us. And when we can have this alignment with akua and aina, we understand on how important it is to aloha kanaka, love and care for one another. Yet, yet, in this society right now, there is this discourse that is increasingly hostile, especially toward diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So how do you remain in this place of being resilient and heart focused? How do you remain in this alignment?
Um, you're, so right. We're in a moment, a critical moment in which many of our identities are politicized, they are demonized. And I think for me, and we recently spoke about this at the Students of Color conference too. For me, how I remain centered is really having that clarity and that belief and that insistence that we must continue to do this work, that we must be unapologetic about who we are, the values that we uphold. And for me, it's really a deep belief that history will revere those of us who are on the side of justice and liberation for all. And I think the stronger the resistance to this work, that also to me signifies there is so much power in our voices, in our narratives, in our collective power, in building, meaningful solidarity and connections between causes, understanding their intersectionality. And while I, fully agree with you, and we're all kind of like in this moment together where the attack is exacerbated. I think for me, it continues, especially like being in spaces of community that continues to fuel me and energize me. And to me, those are like sacred spaces and sacred connections and sacred values that, quite honestly, they cannot take that away from us. And I know. Just like everybody else, I have my ebbs and flows and certain, frustrations. But I don't feel defeated, and I don't feel hopeless. In fact, that just makes me think about, okay, what relationships do I need to build, and make, stronger roots, and build coalitions so we can continue to do this work. And also recognizing that those before us who have come, they have had to navigate their own struggles with their own political climates. And yeah, each time and each generation had their sort of call, to continue this work. And I think we, like, it's now our turn to figure out what does that look like for us. And for me personally, I will not be hopeless. And I'll just share, I was so encouraged at the Students of Color conference, because we are certainly in a moment where even, our identity and self-expression, that has some serious consequences. But to look out through, the room, and to see so many of our students feeling comfortable to be unapologetically and authentically themselves and expressing who they are, seeing students wearing their kufiyas throughout the conference, and knowing that this is a space that that welcomes them, that embraces them, that meant so much to me, right? Because we see that there are students who are literally being abducted, who are facing severe consequences, right? Whether to their immigration status, whether to their educational journeys, yet they're insisting in showing up in this way. And so I think, just coming off of the Students of Color conference and that energy, I I think we're unstoppable, and they can try all the ways, but uh yeah, I think collectively we reject them, we strategize, and uh we continue.
Yes, yes. You know, Mara, you're like the epitome of gracious anger. You reflect that, it's like you have this fire inside of you. Excuse me. you have this fire inside of you, and it is so um like you have control of it.
Mm,
You have control of it. And I think a lot of times we can easily, everything that you mentioned, I could feel in my na'au, in my belly, that tension that has been going around, right? It's like my shoulder starts to cramp up and everything like that. And I can feel it. I can feel it. And we have so many reasons um why we're angry, why we're angry. But if we have the uncontrollable kind of anger where we start hurting people in the process of our hurt, we're only going to perpetuate a bigger divide. And so, I love being around the students, and I'm so sorry that I missed a student of color conference this year,
we missed you.
but it is so powerful because this whole part of being unapologetically yourself. For so many years, I feel like after I left Hawaii, I've always had to apologize for the way that I spoke.
Mm,
I had to apologize for the way that I carried myself, some of my characteristics. I always had to apologize for it. But then when I stepped back and reflect on those moments, I'm like, I'm just being me. This is the
right.
way that I grew up, right? It's like I remember, I think many times you always see me with a flower in my hair.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I stopped wearing the flower in my hair
Mm,
only because someone would say, well, you're not in Hawaii anymore. Or those flowers don't even grow here. Why do you even have to do that?
mhm,
You should just be like the rest of us. So that
right.
assimilation. And so, it's like, yeah, finding that sense of belonging in a place where sometimes we have to, we feel that we've got to curtail who we are. Um, it can be difficult, but I think the way that you are showing up, you're showing up for your students, you're showing up for your people, and you're showing up for what your ancestors brought
Mm,
here. And just because you are here in the United States of America,
right.
that doesn't make you any less Muslim,
Mhm,
which some people feel that, well, now that you're here in America, it's
right.
like, let's take a step back and see actually who's originally from these
Thank you.
states, right? This
Yeah.
country.
Yes. Yep.
Because all these people that are complaining about, well, you should be more of this and you should be more of that, they should be more of where they came from if they actually know where they came from.
Mhm, mhm.
What do you think about that?
Yeah. No, I think about I think about the fact that, I come from a people who also resisted, colonialism and resisted, British colonialism and, just also in connection to, my parents and their history and that resistance movement. And so that to me is part of, that drive that you're talking about. But I also want to say it's an evolution, right? I mean, I came to this country, as a young person a year before 9/11, which had a really significant impact, right, on my life and what it means to grow up a Muslim in this country and to hear this particular narrative about your people and who they are and what that manifestation is like. And so I will for years, I think I struggled, right, in finding my voice, in finding ways that I can contribute because I internalized that message without even realizing that I was internalizing that message. And so it has taken me years, and I'm sure it will continue to take me years to reclaim my identity and to have a
Mhm.
better understanding of who I am, what I'm capable of, and to really like respond to my own ambitions and desires, and to process what does it mean to be in connection with other communities, whether it's my own community or
Yeah.
other communities. So um, at the end of actually the SOCC conference, there was, just like a moment, where I was by myself, and I paused, and I thought about the Marwa now. And those who are close to me have, heard me kind of describe this. Okay, so I rarely say like I'm proud of myself. I'm more often than not say like I'm really hard on myself. But there was a moment where I thought this Marwa would be or the younger Marwa would be proud of this Marwa. And so that's how I'm trying to show up, of trying to be the person that I needed while I was growing up. And of course, just having so many different layers to my identity, right? Having two daughters, thinking about the legacy and the impact that I can have, not only for them but for other youth, not just Muslim youth, but across all communities. So really trying to lean into that. And yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, we can't ask them to to be able to fully show up in all of their identities. How beautiful is that? I mean, to be able to show up in all of their identities. And there's some of us that have these intersecting identities. Sometimes you will, I mean, it's like I find myself, that reclamation that you're talking about, right? Reclaiming that identity. I think what happened, especially for me leaving Hawaii and coming here, I needed to figure out what was this about? What was this place about?
Mhm.
And I adopted and I adapted and I've learned on how to exist on this plane. And it's like at in that moment, like you're talking about the Marwa before and the Marwa now, that Jerry before would tell her sisters, "Shh, quiet. Don't talk like that. I don't want people to think we're stupid." Right? That was that Jerry before. Oh, my husband is white, and it's like you need to dress differently. You need to talk differently. In fact, you know what? Why don't you just sit down and don't even say anything? Right? Let's just be safe. Those are the things that would come through my mind. And I caused a lot of harm in those moments. It's like um I thought at one point that I was better than my own people because, it's like I'm educated and I'm this and I'm that. And, until one of my friends really put me in check and to be like, yo, girl, we know you where you grew up. You grew up in the projects just like us. Don't even try to hide that. And I was like, wait a minute, what's going on? Right. So people would tell me, and in fact, it was I'm just gonna mention her name, Dr. Sayumi Ari.
Mhm.
We were in a conversation before, and she came to see me. I was doing a retreat over at the Whidbey Institute, and she came to see me. And it was like a whole weekend retreat. And it's like probably like the second or third day, she kind of sat me down and she was like, I love what you're doing and everything. And she goes, but you know what? I have to ask you something. I didn't hear your voice. And I was like, you're listening to me for 2 days and you didn't hear my voice. What she told me was she heard me regurgitate what I was taught.
Mhm. Oh, that's very profound. Yeah.
She
Hmm.
heard me regurgitate what I was taught.
Hmm.
The me that came from Hawaii, my mother's language, my father's language was not there, was not present.
Hmm.
And I had to reflect on that because it hit me in the gut like, wait, what's going on?
Yeah.
And then also reflecting on going back home, where, home is a whole different thing because I felt like I've been away for 10 years and now I'm coming back. And it's like, you're not the same person. You're one of them now. You're not one of us.
That's so amazing how we have that connection in both of our stories. But
Yes.
yeah, thank you for sharing that like example because I think that's really powerful. And Dr. Saim is, powerful. And I'm thinking about the Social Justice Institute, and that was actually some of my earliest, years, like in my career, in which I participated in the Social Justice Leadership Institute. I was actually a young mother at the time, and so I remember that experience being, extra emotional because that was also the first time that I left my baby home to go to Whidbey Island to
Mm,
participate,
yes.
in the institute. And yeah, so that also was an important and a significant space. I think, yeah, many, many moments and many mentors and individuals have helped shape me to the point where I'm at. And like I said, there's still so much work of learning and unlearning, right? To really to reconcile with Marwa. I think that's part of the work that I've been involved in.
Yes.
To heal Marwa, to love Marwa, to forgive Marwa, right? And the examples you're sharing are also like really beautiful, to think about our growth and the versions of who we are. Yeah, so
It
and
is.
I'll say also, just for my daughters, this was their first time going to Iraq, and that has been so important to me and to my husband, right? For us to take our daughters, for them to know that they are part of a great civilization. They are part of very strong roots, for them to visit the town that he's from, and for them to visit the town that I'm from. I mean, the day that we arrived to Misan, and to be in the house that I was born in, I was, super emotional because it's almost like you're having this conversation with yourself, like, right? It's like, who are you? And you have returned, like you said, transformed, the same person, yes, but in many ways you're also not. And so, and no, and also thinking about my grandchildren, right? If I have grandchildren, right? Will they return to Iraq? Will they know Iraq? Will they have that sense of uh, connection to their heritage, to their language? Um, Learning Arabic is also like super important for us in terms of teaching our daughters. And so we're still, on that journey. And that's really like one of my hopes and dreams as a parent, is that my children will speak Arabic. And so, we're in that process, and it's not an easy one, but we'll keep at it. And yeah.
That's so beautiful, Marwa. Just everything, everything that you're talking about, Iraq. Here, there's a different story. There's a different narrative. What's your narrative of your hometown, of
Mm,
your place?
yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful place, a place that has so much history, such, a rich heritage. Iraq is part of, right, Mesopotamia, and many dub it to be the cradle of civilization, where, whether it's the art or the history or agriculture, all of these different things that are, signified in those places. And the palm trees, I can't help but like talk about the palm trees, right? The scenery, the rivers, and also, the different mosques and the different architectural places, right? That also are such an intricate part of that town. And I should say I come from like a rural small town, and so also just the fields, um, and you earlier were talking about that connection to the land. In Arab culture, we actually have this concept that the land is of like the utmost significance, so much so that the land represents your honor. And so, even, if we contextualize it into kind of our like current moments and around some struggles, around the world, and some might not understand what is so significant about the land and protecting your land. And it comes from that. It comes from this sense that your honor is directly connected to your land and protecting your land and loving your land and caring for your land. So um, so it's part of that. It's also part of, something that we did too is we went on these pilgrimages, especially to important Shia sites. So there are different like schools of thoughts in Islam. I happen to come from the Shia school of thought, and we took pilgrimages to Imam Hussein and to Imam Ali and to Imam Hassan's pilgrimage sites in the cities of Karbala as well as the cities of Najaf. And those experiences, I mean, really some of the most um, some of the most like incredible majestic experiences that one could have. And maybe I could share photos, but it's essentially their tomb sites, and visitors from across the world, I mean, it's so many people, thousands of people, sometimes even millions of people, during important religious times, they would come to these sites and ask for essentially prayers and do supplications, etc. And so revisiting those sites, yeah, I mean, it really it gives you that moment of pause and that desire to have that like deep spiritual connection. I mean, I think that's also another thing that I was trying to revive within me, right? Is how am I spiritually, connected to my faith, to my land, to my identity, to my people, to my communities. And so that also was just like absolutely outstanding. So we did quite a bit of traveling in Iraq. We visited Basra, we visited Misan, we visited Baghdad and Karbala and Najaf. So yeah, it was quite an elaborate trip.
That is so exciting, and what a blessing for your daughters to
Yep.
be able to experience that.
Yep.
And just you sharing about the part of the world that many of us probably have never visited. All we can do is imagine. And it's like when we hear about the places where, people talk about, we need to hear it from those who are in connection, who understands the depth of where you come from, because people will miss out on it all. And I feel that if we were just open, if we had open hearts and open minds to be able to see the beauty of our planet, maybe we would be caring for each other a little bit more, honoring each other for where
Respect.
they come from, and that respect,
Mhm.
you know, we'd be having a different conversation, right? I think our entire um, society would be different if we were able to let go of some of the biases that we have, some of the prejudices that we have, and to really understand on why you lead the work. I can see why, Marwa, that you are leading the work of diversity, equity, inclusion. And there is not a better person to be able to do that, because you bring in the diversity. You bring in the knowledge that it's like, hello, there is more to our world than just what we see here. There's more to our world than what we read in books, right? Is that engage with one another. It's like one of my ancestors would say, he alo, ahe alo, face to face, right? Punani Burgess, Auntie Punani Burgess would talk about that, because she said that's the only way we're going to know each other. Not by the books we read, not by what people tell us, not by any of that, but really knowing each other. And so that's what we're doing.
Yes, you saying that like reminded me too of just like my experience of reconnecting with my relatives there, right? And some who are distant relatives or even family friends or even neighbors, but seeing how hospitable and how welcoming and how loving they were towards me and my family, it reminded me of how important those connections are. And some, I mean, some haven't seen me since I was a baby, but they still had this deep sense of love for me and my family. And that, I think that was really powerful for me, right? we come from collectivist societies, and there is such strength and power that comes from this idea of you are not alone and you don't have to journey through this life
Yes.
alone. You come from
Yes.
a lineage, you come from a family, you come from a community. And I think it's those roots that you're also alluding to that are so important in how we navigate this world. And so that to me just was another reminder of that's how I want to also lead, and not lead from like an individualistic kind of perspective. And I mean the rushness and kind of the busyness of how we lead our lives here, it's very different from there. So there is that time for connection, there's that time for presence. We, I would say, had so many times of like having chai and coffee, and that's where the conversations are happening. There's even like these different paintings about what the cup of tea, the cup of chai, what it represents in Iraqi culture. And it's always there. The chai is there when it's a happy occasion or a sad occasion, but it's a way for you to be present and to connect with others. And so that was also something I just deeply appreciated, of having those moments of seeing one another and connecting and talking.
Oh, absolutely. And your stories, you coming back, sharing your stories with your students on just your experience, that right there is ways of being and knowing. It's like a lot of times especially in higher ed, we get so bogged down with certain ways of being and knowing and understanding the world. But then when we look at it, it's so Eurocentric.
Mhm, mhm.
It's so Eurocentric. It's like there's other ways
Yeah.
of being, there's other ways of living. Let me share with you. Let me share with you. And when we start sharing with one another, honor it and respect that this is a knowledge and this is a gift
Mm.
that we're giving one another, right? Is by learning about our different cultures or different places of where we grew up, is honoring that.
Yes.
And if we
Even
were
our
able,
stories.
in our stories, yes,
Yeah.
yes, in our stories,
Mhm.
because there's always medicine in the stories. There's medicine in our words.
They're healing.
Very healing, very healing.
And I've the older I've gotten, I've also I think become more selective in who I share my story with. So the
Yes.
younger, version of me, maybe I would, more readily share my story. But then I
Yeah.
also realized that, depending on the context, sometimes you open up and you share different aspects of yourself, and those around you, maybe they're not ready to receive that. And so I'm much more selective in terms of who I share my story with, or even aspects about myself. Um, yeah, and I think that's just been important to me. So yeah, just really like holding space for that. So my kind of frame around that now is not everyone is entitled to know my story or to have access,
Mhm.
to parts of me. And there's really there's a need for trust building and relationship building as well. And so
That's a good one too, that trust, right? Is like, and how do you gain that trust? You gain that trust through relationship. How do you do those relationships? You get to know one another, you honor one another, you respect one another. And I love that you said that not everybody has access to your stories. And so it's like, I feel that way too, right? It's like I have my small group of people where I feel safe enough to let my walls down. And I feel safe enough to know that if there was anything that I would say that is contradictory to what I say in public, they would be like, girl, we got you. We know that this is you right now. This is what you're
deep level of
feeling.
understanding. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And not everybody has that.
Mhm.
And not everybody are welcome because we're energy,
Yeah.
and sometimes our energy just doesn't match up.
Mhm.
And if it doesn't match up, it's okay. That doesn't mean you've got to hate on one another. It's just the
Yeah.
fact that I respect myself enough to know that my energy is not jiving with yours. You're not jiving with me. I can love you from afar. Right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, even in our moment, the distractions are many. And I think, being selective about where we pour our energy, our efforts,
Mhm.
and our time, and our care and love, like that matters, right?
Yes, it does because it actually it takes a toll on your body, on your spirit, on your mind. And we've got to, like you said, when we are in these spaces, these are sacred spaces. And it's sacred because we are bringing our sacred selves into that space. And so we can honor each other's humanness, and experiences. It creates the space where we can trust. And right now it's hard. It's hard in this world, but I feel like you were saying this collective idea that there are those of us that are doing the heart work. You're doing the heart work. We just got to keep shining that light, like Care Bears. It's like Love a Lot Bear. It's like,
Right. Yeah.
and then be careful as well too. Like how my husband always tells me, he's like, you always shining your light. He goes, but sometimes you have to protect yourself. He goes, so be like a lattice where there is this protective barrier around your heart where you're just shining where it needs to be shined. I'm like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, I wanted to ask you about DEI,
Mm.
especially being a woman in leadership, a Muslim woman in leadership. How do you how do you fulfill your kuliana, or your sacred duty, your sacred responsibility to communities that are often targeted or marginalized in today's political climate?
Mm. Yeah. So for me, being a Muslim woman in this DEI space, which can be a contentious space, and I think for me, I own that, I recognize that, and then I think about my obligation and my responsibility, right, to communities that have historically been marginalized, that continue to be marginalized, in our contemporary times, and continuing to move through really like also being strategic about, okay, how do we advocate, how do we continue this work, having an understanding of how the system is working, and really trying to dismantle that, and building coalitions. I think it's so important that this work we is not done alone. And I think that's what has sustained me, and that's what also gives me fuel and power, is that how do we recognize that our struggles are really interconnected, and these different systems of power, and having an analysis and an understanding of power, that these different systems are oppressing us all, yes, in unique ways, but nonetheless we have to come together in order to reject them, to dismantle them, to reimagine a different world, right? And I think that's how I've thought about it. I would say, as a Muslim woman who I don't see, a lot of other Muslim women in many of the spaces that I'm in. And so trying to represent my community, but also have an understanding that the Muslim community, or even the Muslim woman category, it's not a monolithic experience, and holding space for that as well is so important.
So how do you in this world of inclusivity, of wanting to be inclusive, there are individuals that are totally against DEI and anything that has to do with DEI. How do you meet them with compassion and aloha?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, it goes back to like that insisting on continuing this work and that clarity. I um I think for me, it's really not investing my energy in that space, if I can say it like that, because I recognize that these ideologies, they're deeply rooted, right? And I don't see it as my role to change someone's ideology around that. Like for me, if your consciousness and your moral compass is leading you to a particular conclusion, that is for you to reckon with. Though, those are not the conclusions and moral ethics and principles that I have. And so I think for me, honestly, in this current moment and, for years now, I don't see that to be my work. I, meet them, with respect, with understanding, but I don't like, that's not where my energy is invested. That's not where my calling is. I see that as work that they have to engage in. And by all means, if these are ideologies that you're proud of and you would want your progeny to like reflect back and say this is what my ancestor believed in, like by all means go ahead, but that won't be me.
Mhm, mhm. That's such a good way to answer that, Marwa. I love it because, I mean, that's something that we're up against all the time, right? In this world of, and then you can hear it. You can also hear it in some of the agendas that's coming out, is that they're utilizing the same language,
Mm,
right? And it's like they begin just like what's happened before is to weaponize it,
mhm,
not really truly understanding what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about.
mhm,
They've learned to weaponize it. And I think, yeah, what is your moral compass?
mhm,
What's the narrative that you're having in your head, conversations? What is it that your children are going to pick up on?
mhm,
Right? Is like, are you instilling love? Are you instilling hope? Are you instilling hate? What are you instilling in them? And then if it's like later on down the line, there's issues, we've got to ask ourselves, what did I play in all of this? This is the society that we have. What was my responsibility in it?
mhm,
And if we know that we've done, we've done what we can do, so that way we know that we're in the right with our spirit, then I think that's the best that we can do. I can, it's like my mantra is I will always continue to give aloha, even in a world that doesn't know how to give aloha back.
mhm, mhm, mhm.
So, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Anything, is there anything else that you would want to, share with the audience, and, what
Yeah.
hopes do you have?
Yeah, I just really want to reiterate just how grateful I am, for this conversation, and to share this space with you, as someone who looks up to the work that you do, and really learning a lot from you when we're in spaces, and even the questions, and as I was preparing, for this podcast, really thinking about aloha, and this is something I want to really think more about what does that principle mean for me as a Muslim woman, right? I think currently how I understand it to be a spiritual framework, right? Of harmony, of obligation, of doing what's right, of courage, of presence. And so I think, I want to thank you because you have, led me to like think about what are those principles and how do I embody them? How do I show up in these ways? Um, just I mean, lastly, I think my hopes are that we can each, feel supported in being unapologetically who we are, but also recognizing that we have so much to contribute. I mean, you really are talking to someone that I for years would, have that like self-talk with myself of I don't have something to contribute, and everyone else in the room has something greater to say and more profound to say. And really, just also realizing that our stories in the way that they are so powerful, and they allow others to share their story, and they invite others to be themselves. One of the things at the end of the SOCC conference, one of the students came up to me and said, "I just want to say thank you. You all have inspired me to start a Muslim student association on my campus." And that to me, like, this is, I think, what we're capable of, and the power of these, creating these different spaces, right? Like, it might not seem so momentous, to create a student club, but when we also understand the power and the history of students in, in objecting, to different, how do I want to call them, like, objecting to different oppressions throughout different
Mhm.
historical moments. To me, that's really significant. That's really important that this student is walking away from this space saying, "Oh, I can create this space and, pave the way for other Muslim students." This is a student from our rural college here in Washington, and so yeah, the hope is for all of us to continue, you know, to allow ourselves to, uh, to share who we are, and to heal parts of us that, need healing. And I know that's, a process and a journey, a convoluted one, perhaps at times, but one that's worth engaging in, and one that's worthwhile.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's like you passed on this knowledge to this student and you were inspired by other people and those people were inspired by other people. So all we're doing is that we are just passing it down, passing that knowledge down. And it's like, how are we going to do this for the betterment of everyone? The betterment of all of society, for every human being on this planet, not just for specific individuals.
That's right.
So by showing up unapologetically and doing what you're doing, that's where the healing begins, right? And through your evolution and through your growth, you had to hold the mirror up to yourself and reflect on some things.
Hmm.
And I know for myself, reflecting back on some things, I'm like, ooh, that came from trauma, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And knowing that sometimes even our actions right now, the things that we say could actually be induced by something that we've experienced before. So finding that grace for ourselves when those moments do come up, because we're all
Yeah,
human
because they will
beings.
come up. Yeah. Yeah.
They will come up, and sometimes they come up unexpectedly, So Marwa, thank you so much for spending this time with me. It was such an honor getting to know you and for everything that you bring to not just to Green River, but to the world. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much, Dr. Jerry. Thank you. I really treasure this opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the evolution of Aloha podcast. Tune in for upcoming episodes with other amazing people. And don't forget to subscribe to the Evolution of Aloha and Plowline podcast, available on all of your popular podcast platforms. So until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other. And ahui ho.